The Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions will come to order. 2 years ago, 6 Supreme Court justices, all nominated by Republican presidents, decided to overturn Roe v. Wade, abolish the constitutional right for women to have an abortion, and to give politicians in state government the right to control the bodies of women in state after state. This morning, we will be holding a hearing to take a hard look at how this Supreme Court decision, the Dobbs decision, has impacted women, physicians, and healthcare providers throughout our country. In a few minutes, I am going to be handing the gavel as chair of the committee to Senator Patty Murray, because given the subject matter, I think it's appropriate for a woman to chair this important hearing, and this is an issue that Senator Murray has been deeply and passionately involved in for many, many years. But before I hand the gavel over to Senator Murray, let me say a few words on a subject I feel very, very strongly about. It is no secret to anyone that throughout our country's history, women have had to fight for their basic human rights against all forms of patriarchy and sexism. No great secret. Women had to struggle, and some died, in order to achieve the right to vote, something which they did not receive until 1920. Women had to struggle for the right to get the education that they wanted all over America. Women wanted to go to this school, wanted to do that, couldn't get into the door because they were women. Women had to struggle to get banks to lend them the money they needed to buy a car or start their own business. In fact, up to 1974, banks in America could legally refuse to issue a credit card to a woman simply because she was a woman. Women struggled to choose the careers they wanted. In the 1950s, it was legal for employers to fire women for the crime of getting married. You got fired because you chose to get married. Up until 1964, it was legal for employers in America to reject a job applicant simply because the applicant was a woman. The struggle for equal pay, for equal work, continues to this day. In America today, women working full-time make just 84 cents on the dollar compared to men. And on it goes. Women struggling for their basic human rights. Then on January 22nd, 1973, after decades and decades of struggle, women in America finally won the right to control their own bodies as a result of the Supreme Court decision in Roe v. Wade. No longer would state governments be able to tell women what they could or could not do with their own bodies. And when we talk about the history of how all of these happened, let's not ignore the lack of political representation that women had. In 1987, not so many years ago, there were 2 women in the United States Senate and 98 men. Those are the folks all over this country who are making the decision. The truth is that men would not tolerate them being subject to government decisions regarding how they can control their own bodies. I am not aware of any state in this country that has ever restricted the right of a man to get Viagra or any other medication prescribed by a doctor. I'm not aware of any state in this country that has prevented a man from getting a vasectomy or any other medical procedure that men choose to get that has been approved by a doctor. You know, we hear a lot of talk about freedom in this body. Freedom to do what you want to do. And yet, right now, we are living at a time when half of our population or more has lost that freedom. And by the way, when I talk about the right of women to be able to control their own bodies, it's not just me talking, it's what the American people believe in poll after poll, in state election after state election. People are saying we may disagree politically, may disagree on this or that issue, but very strongly, the American people believe it is women, not the government, that has a right to control their own body. Senator Murray, the gavel is yours.
Chairman Sanders, thank you so much for your statement, and thank you for letting me chair today's hearing on a topic that is deeply important to me, and I want to thank all of our witnesses for joining us here today. Today, we take a close accounting of the trauma Republicans are inflicting on women and families across our country, and the damage they are doing to basic reproductive health care through their horrific anti-abortion crusade. The issue here is simple, and it cuts to the core of American values: freedom. Many women every day experience the joy of becoming pregnant and raising a family. They were able to make that decision for themselves. But no woman, no one should be dragged through a pregnancy against their will. But right now in America, more than a third of women of reproductive age live in states where they essentially do not have the choice to end a pregnancy if they need to. Instead, Republicans have made the choice for them, with extreme abortion bans and cruel restrictions on access to care. With these policies, they have told women in no uncertain terms, you don't control your body, we do. That is horrifying. Think about what it means, what it really means to be told someone else can decide you have to stay pregnant, no matter the circumstances. Think about how little power that gives a woman over her own life and her own health. And think about how much power that gives not just politicians, but any man who knows he can get a woman pregnant, force her to stay pregnant, so he can have control over her or even get revenge for the rest of her life. To every Republican who hopes this issue will go away, or is hoping the post-Dobbs reality will become settled status quo, listen. You never forget, and you never just get used to someone else taking control of your body, your medical decisions, your plans for your family, or your future. You never forget a politician rescinding your right to make decisions about something as personal as your own pregnancy and imposing his will instead, especially when you live with the consequences every day. And the consequences of the post-Dobbs abortion bans are so much broader and so much more devastating than any one story or hearing can ever do justice. There are stories that get a lot of attention, that are shocking almost beyond belief. Stories of women denied care for a miscarriage because of abortion bans. Women turned away from hospitals because their doctors' hands were tied, until they lost over half of their blood, until their husband found them unconscious, until the only option was an emergency hysterectomy, or tragically, until it was simply too late. Or stories of children who can't get abortion care after being raped. Some kids may be able to get across state lines to get the care they need. Other children have been forced into motherhood by Republican politicians. One teenager delivered a baby while clutching a teddy bear. These nightmares are happening across our country as a direct result of Republican abortion bans. And there are so many other stories that go untold. Women who do not want to be pregnant for whatever reason, maybe they can't afford to have another child right now. Maybe they are in an abusive relationship. Maybe they just don't want a kid right now, period. But they are told by politicians they have no say in the matter. Not unless they have the time and resources, often thousands of dollars, to travel, in some cases, hundreds and hundreds of miles. It is harrowing. If they can fix that.
Can we fix that?
It is harrowing to think that we live in a reality where forced pregnancy has become so widespread and so rampant that only the most dystopian stories get national attention. But the stories of all the other women who are confronted by these bans, their pain, their heartbreak, their anger, and fears are also horrific, valid, and an important part of the conversation. A forced pregnancy does not have to make headlines to make someone's life a living hell. And let's be clear about a few more things before we get started. Republican attacks are not only hurting people in the states where they banned abortion, they are not only hurting women who need an abortion, and their attacks on our rights are not stopping at an abortion. When it comes to states like mine where abortion is legal, providers are being stretched beyond capacity by women in desperate need of abortion care they can no longer get at their home. So when it comes to women who aren't even seeking an abortion, bans are hollowing out health care for women in general, especially for those who already face some of the biggest challenges getting care, women of color, Indigenous women, those in rural communities. Because, in a surprise to no one, healthcare providers do not want to work in states where politicians get between a doctor and their patient and threaten providers with jail time and the loss of their medical license if they dare to help patients get the care they need. So in states with extreme abortion bans, we are seeing healthcare providers closing their doors and shutting down their practices, new doctors staying away, and fewer options for patients to get a whole range of necessary healthcare services. The consequences extend far beyond abortion. And when it comes to what is next, well, Republicans have already made it painfully clear they want a national abortion plan. And no matter what they're saying now, we can just look at the record. Look at how many Republicans have co-sponsored national abortion bans. Look at the Life at Conception Act. That is a bill that is supported by more than half of the House Republican Conference that would enshrine fetal personhood nationwide. Let's be clear what that would mean. Not just an abortion ban. It would mean that women and doctors will be charged with murder for an abortion, making them eligible for the death penalty in their states. It would mean emergency contraception, like Plan B, outlawed. And it would mean IVF ripped away from people who are trying to start a family. This is not theoretical. We saw how much chaos this dangerously extreme ideology already caused for families in Alabama. And yet there are Republican states and Republican members of Congress, including the Speaker of the House, who support making fetal personhood the law of the land. That is extreme in the extreme. But in the face of all this horror, we've also seen an outcry from women and men who refuse to let Republicans keep dragging our nation backwards and stripping away our basic rights. Every time abortion rights have been on the ballot since Dobbs, every single time abortion rights have won. People are standing up and they're speaking out, and Democrats are proud to stand with them. Democrats are going to make sure women's voices are heard in our nation's capital, including at hearings like this one. And we're going to keep fighting to pass the Women's Health Protection Act and restore the basic and fundamental right of women to control their own bodies. While former President Trump continues to brag about how he overturned Roe and made clear he will go even farther to restrict and ban abortion if given the chance, Democrats have been clear. With a pro-choice majority in the House and Senate and Joe Biden in the White House, we will restore and protect abortion rights for every woman in America. Thank you. And with that, I look forward to hearing from all of our witnesses, but first I will turn it over to Senator Cassidy for his opening statement.
Thank you, Senator Murray. So let's table set. It's an election year in which a Democratic incumbent president is running behind. So a decision has been made to raise abortion to a high profile, to change the setting, to invite a lot of folks to put us on TV. It's partisan politics being played out in a committee hearing. But let me point out as well, it's not entirely partisan. Louisiana's pro-life law was written by a female Democratic state senator, and written and signed into law by a Democratic governor, and that female Democratic state senator was reelected with wide margins. So there is a breadth across the political spectrum of people who have a different way of framing this. My Democratic colleagues want you to think that Republicans believe terrible things. They'll attempt to normalize a decision to abort a child. But a Republican would say that you can't normalize a procedure, at least this Republican, in which the intent is to end a life. Don't be misled. This is a life. This is a life. Does anyone say that that child is not a life? How could you not? I'm a doctor. I see that you have to take care of that mama. You have to take care of that mama. But you have to recognize that there is another life there as well. This is not just a collection of cells. This is a child that, if delivered, will live. And maybe this one too, and that one as well. So let's have a national dialogue. Let's actually explore this as opposed to exploit it for political advantage. In medical school, I was taught to care for every patient who walks in the door and to recognize that when a woman is pregnant, there are two patients there. And the second that baby gets air, it doesn't matter how small and how vulnerable, how unsustainable, how weak. The doctors, the nurses, the institution does everything they can to save their life. And by golly, don't you want them to do that? Don't you want the people who are entrusted with the health care to have that ethic? I believe that the responsibility to protect and save the child shouldn't be determined by the arbitrary difference of being inside or outside the womb. I am unapologetically pro-life. Scientifically and morally, there's no difference in the value of a child whether she is in her mother's arms or whether she is in her mother's womb. The science is clear. This is just not a clump of cells, and this is a difficult poster to look at. I can tell you it's difficult. The reason it's difficult is because you recognize that by their policies, it should be legal to abort that child. It is difficult, but let's frame it for what it is. How can we dehumanize this? And yet this is what it's an attempt to do. At what point do my Democratic colleagues believe that a child deserves to live? It does a disservice to the mother to dehumanize the unborn child and discuss this issue as only the right to abort or not to abort. This is one of the most significant decisions a woman will ever make. We should not trivialize. Now, I understand and accept the need for exceptions to laws that regulate abortion under certain circumstances. But unlike some of our testimony here, terminating life does not spare a woman from potential grief. This should never be an easy decision. If so, we've lost our moral compass. And I just want people to read the entire testimony of Dr. Francis, in which she refutes a lot of what was said kind of blithely, and she actually puts scientific data behind it. And as a physician, fear-mongering, I find infuriating. A woman experiencing the emotionally and physically painful experience of miscarriage or an ectopic pregnancy is already grappling with the loss of her unborn child, and yet this committee hearing would take this vulnerable moment of that woman's life and misrepresent it and use it for political gain. There is no law in any state preventing a doctor from treating a patient going through a miscarriage or an ectopic pregnancy or from preventing the saving of the life of a mother. That is called health care. That is not an abortion. One of the most inspirational medical professors I ever said that in healthcare, in medicine, our highest calling is truth. And frankly, that's why I find it frustrating that fellow physicians are misleading on these facts or corrupt the truth for a political viewpoint. While it's disappointing that my colleagues would say things that are not true, deceiving Americans about Republicans' stand on the issue, it's also reprehensible that they mislead Americans on the Democrats' own extreme views. Now, Democrats will say that they want to codify Roe v. Wade. That's not true. The truth is that the Democratic policies go beyond Roe. Their marquee legislation would legalize late-term abortion in every state aborting this child. Ban states that prevent coerced abortion, allow strangers to convince an underage child to get an abortion without notifying the parents that she is pregnant. Perhaps that pregnancy was due to abuse. Shouldn't the parents know? Why should the parents' rights be abrogated? And eviscerate the conscience rights of healthcare professionals who have moral or religious objections to abortion. Speak about driving people out of the healthcare field. Now, Senator Kaine has a bill that explicitly codifies Roe into law. The only Democrats willing to co-sponsor are Senators Sinema and Manchin, neither one of whom call themselves Democrats by now. So it begs the question, why does Senator Kaine's bill to codify Roe not have more Democratic support? Well, it makes a good rallying cry, but the policy of codifying Roe is too conservative for the fringes that now define the debate in the Democratic Party. There are 9 states plus Washington, D.C., whose laws right now, allow for abortion up to parturition. The child can be ready to go through the birth canal, and abortion is legalized. Not because of the life of the mother, just to legalize it. That is where the Democratic Party has gone. That should give everybody a moral pause. That should give us all a moral pause. Now, I ask my Democratic colleagues, can you designate a point at which a pregnancy should not be terminated unless for the life of the mother or instead of some extenuating circumstances? Can you tell me if it's here or here or here? I think that's a fair question. I invite everybody to be a doctor who's trying to balance the needs of the unborn child with that of the mom. My Democratic colleagues may also claim that abortions are low-risk procedures, claiming that they're so safe they can be done without medical supervision. Not entirely accurate, minimizing the potential complications, but that's the way you can kind of feel better about this. And again, I refer people once more to Dr. Francis's complete testimony, not just the 5 minutes she'll give today. Now, demagoguing and fear-mongering on access to treatment for miscarriages and ectopic pregnancies, casting a decision to abort or not to abort as an easy one, is a tremendous disservice. I have supported postpartum coverage for women in Medicaid. I've worked on serious legislation to advance maternal health, like the Connected Moms Act with Senator Maggie Hassan, which lets physicians remotely monitor pregnant women for potential complications. From my practice in Louisiana, a woman who's 8.5 months pregnant using public transportation in August in Louisiana. You can empathize with her and understand that if you can remotely monitor her, her life is so much better. Senator Bob Casey and I led legislation, now law, to ensure that pregnant women are entitled to reasonable accommodations in the workforce. There is much more we can do to support the woman who's pregnant, but we should debate and advance legislation so that we're not leaving them without solutions when they are faced with a very difficult, traumatic, and complex question. We want women, moms, to be healthy, successful, and prosperous. And the human life inside a woman triggers the double line that the human life, do a pregnancy test, those double lines come up. Those double lines should not represent a burden, as the other side would like to cast. It should represent a gift. But there's things that we can do to make her life easier. I am open to the tough conversations. I think we should all be. But we shouldn't minimize by dehumanizing. And it must be with respect for both the mother and the defenseless and voiceless unborn child that are participating in that debate. This is too personal for too many Americans. With that, I yield.
We will now introduce today's witnesses and move to testimony. Today we'll be hearing from Madison Anderson. She's a young woman from Texas who was forced to leave her state and travel hundreds of miles to get the abortion care she needed after Texas passed its draconian abortion ban. Dr. Nisha Verma, an OBGYN, an abortion provider in Georgia, and a fellow with Physicians for Reproductive Health. Destiny Lopez, acting CEO of the Guttmacher Institute, and Dr. Allison Linton, Chief Medical Officer of Planned Parenthood of Wisconsin. She's also an OBGYN, an abortion provider, and a fellow with Physicians for Reproductive Health. I will turn it over to Ranking Member Cassidy to introduce his witnesses.
Yes, I introduced Dr. Christina Francis. She's a board-certified OBGYN working as an OBGYN hospitalist, treating women with both high and low-risk pregnancies who are hospitalized. She is a board member of Indiana Right to Life, and she is the CEO of the American Association of Pro-Life Obstetricians and Gynecologists. I will also introduce Miss Melissa Ohden. I have that right, correct? Ohden? Yes. Who is the founder and chief executive officer of the Abortion Survivors Network. Melissa will tell us of her story about surviving a failed saline infusion abortion in 1977 that was intended to end her life. We're fortunate that Melissa has made this her life's work and runs the Abortion Survivors Network, a group providing support to other abortion survivors and mothers who have experienced a failed abortion. I look forward to hearing from you today, Melissa, and thank you for sharing your powerful story.
Again, thank you to all of our witnesses. We will begin with Ms. Anderson.
Thank you, Senator. Chair Sanders, Senator Murray, Ranking Member Cassidy, and members of the committee. My name is Madison Anderson, and I live in Houston, Texas. 2 years ago, during my senior year at the University of Houston, I had come out of a 2-year-long relationship. After a couple weeks of nausea, not sleeping, or eating, I took a pregnancy test. I called a friend to bring me more tests because I was in disbelief. At one point, I had 5 tests in front of me, and there was no disputing I was pregnant. This was just 2 weeks after the Texas abortion ban, known as SB 8, went into effect, banning abortion after 6 weeks. I knew almost immediately that abortion was the right choice for me. I called and got an appointment at the local Planned Parenthood just 5 minutes away from me for later that week. I thought I was early enough to be able to get my abortion that week, but at my appointment, my pregnancy measured 11 weeks. I was shocked. I couldn't get an abortion in Texas. I called 20 different clinics after my first visit. Yes, 20. I called surrounding states and even as far as the Dakotas. No one could see me right away. The earliest I could be seen was 2 weeks later at Jackson Women's Health Organization in Mississippi. This was before the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health decision that would take away the federal constitutional right for abortion. And before 20 more states would ban abortion. And before wait times in states that didn't have bans would stretch longer and longer. My dad took off work and we drove a total of 720 miles round trip and spent 13 hours on the road. We spent 5 hours in a hotel trying to sleep before my first appointment, just to turn right around and go back home. Here's the thing, because of unnecessary restrictions on abortion care in Mississippi, I would have to make the trip all over again. The state essentially puts patients in a timeout because they don't trust people to know what is best for their health or lives. When I got this news, I was angry and sleep-deprived and starving, and never more certain of my decision. That certainty never faltered. The following week, my mom was able to find us affordable tickets, and we flew out to Jackson. The start of our day was at 7 a.m. to make it to my 1:30 appointment. After my procedure, I waited in the recovery room for about 20 minutes before having to hop in the car and make my flight back home. I want to talk for a minute about money. As a college student who took out multiple student loans and was counting every penny, I had to pay for my first appointment in Houston, my first appointment in Mississippi, and the abortion itself. Then gas and a hotel for the first trip, and then flights for the second trip. I missed 20 hours each of work and a mandatory internship for my school. A total, $2,850. There is no dollar value I can put on the stress of managing everything, the despair of having to go to such lengths for basic health care that was legal just weeks before I needed it, the gut-wrenching reality of having to disclose something so personal to my boss, professors, and anyone in a position of authority for fear of losing my job, of failing every class that semester due to all of the class time and assignments that I was forced to miss. I felt so much anger that the politicians in Austin thought that they had the right to make this decision for me. I am one of thousands of people that have now gone through this. Every day that we go without the right for abortion, there will be more of us, more savings accounts drained, more classes and shifts missed, more choices on which bills to skip paying. If I had found out I was pregnant last year or last month, Jackson Women's Health would not have been there for me. The people who cared for me that day cannot care for abortion patients today. I have to go to Mississippi or New Mexico, Kansas, or as far as Illinois to make that decision today. We talk about abortion, and it is easy to get stuck in theoreticals, but I am a real person. The lives of abortion patients are not theoretical. People will continue to get pregnant when they are not ready or just simply don't want to be. We will always need abortions. This is simply no place for a politician to decide for us. Thank you for inviting me here today and letting me share my story with you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Verma.
Good morning, Chair Sanders, Senator Murray, Ranking Member Cassidy, and distinguished members of the Senate Help Committee. My name is Dr. Nisha Verma, and I'm a board-certified, fellowship-trained obstetrician and gynecologist providing full-spectrum reproductive health care. I'm a fellow with Physicians for Reproductive Health, and I'm also a proud Southerner. I was born and raised in North Carolina. I currently provide care in Georgia, and I've lived in the Southeast for most of my life. I made a commitment when I became a doctor to care for people without judgment throughout their lives. For me, that commitment holds whether I'm talking a young person through a first pap smear, delivering a couple's highly anticipated third child, or supporting a patient and her family as they decide to continue or end a pregnancy. However, after the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision, with Georgia enacting a law that bans most abortions in our state very early in pregnancy, I struggle every day to provide necessary, life-saving medical care. I've seen young moms with worsening medical conditions that make their pregnancies very high risk, and couples whose deeply desired pregnancies are in the process of miscarrying be turned away or forced to leave their communities to access needed health care. As a doctor, I have the immense privilege of sitting with patients and learning about their lives. For me, these patient stories are a powerful reminder that abortion is not an isolated political issue, and today I want to provide a glimpse of what access to abortion care means for real people. Shortly after Georgia's 6-week abortion ban went into effect in 2022, I saw a young woman who had just started her junior year of high school, and despite using her birth control correctly, realized after missing her period that she might be pregnant. She called to make a clinic appointment for an abortion right away, but when she came to see me, she unfortunately was just a couple days past Georgia's arbitrary cutoff, which bans most abortions after just 2 weeks from the first missed period. I had to tell her that, even though I have the skills to help her, I can no longer perform her abortion in our state. She returned to rural Georgia where she lives, and I didn't see her again until a few weeks ago. At our most recent visit, she told me that she was unable to find the resources and support to get out of state for abortion care. She also couldn't find a doctor in her part of the state that took her insurance, Medicaid, for many months, and so even though she was forced to continue her pregnancy against her will, she couldn't get prenatal care. After delivering her baby, she struggled with postpartum depression and had to move out of her home, drop out of school, and work a minimum wage job to try to make ends meet. She told me that she loves her son, but this is not the life she wanted or planned for herself. I have thought about this patient every day since she came back to my clinic. I know it was Georgia's laws that prevented me from providing her with the medical care she needed and deserved, but I still feel like as her doctor, I failed her. This patient's story, while heartbreaking, is not unique. We know that bans and restrictions have forced many people to stay pregnant, and we know the harm that people experience when they are unable to get this care. They're more likely to face long-lasting economic hardship, to stay in contact with a violent partner, and to develop serious health problems. Mental health conditions like the postpartum depression that my patient experienced are the leading cause of pregnancy-related deaths in this country. We also know that abortion care is incredibly safe. In fact, in 2022, over 75 major professional societies representing the overwhelming consensus of the science-based medical community came together to reaffirm that abortion is safe, essential health care. As patients face a growing wave of abortion restrictions, many describe feeling betrayed by a government and healthcare system that is supposed to serve and protect them. Doctors, too, feel betrayed by our government. Many of my colleagues, overwhelmed by laws that threaten to make us criminals for providing evidence-based, life-saving care to our patients, are leaving their states. In places like Georgia, where already over 50% of counties have no OBGYNs, these worsening workforce shortages are devastating for all aspects of reproductive health care. I understand that abortion care can be a complicated issue for many people, just like so many aspects of healthcare and life can be. I also know that abortion is necessary, compassionate, essential health care, and that patients are capable of making complex, thoughtful decisions about their health and lives. No law should prevent them from doing so. I urge you to listen to the stories of people who provide and access abortion care. I hope these stories help you to see how profoundly restrictions on abortion access harm all of our communities. Thank you for having me today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Ms. Lopez.
Thank you, Chair Sanders, Ranking Member Cassidy, Senator Murray, and the distinguished members of the committee for the opportunity to highlight the clear and growing evidence that the Dobbs decision is harming reproductive health and freedom. My name is Destiny Lopez. I'm the acting co-CEO of the Guttmacher Institute, a leading research and policy organization committed to advancing sexual and reproductive health and rights worldwide. For decades following the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision, anti-abortion advocates worked strategically to make abortion harder to get and highly stigmatized. Public support for abortion's legality has remained high and consistent, but the sheer number of state-level abortion restrictions ensured that abortion became inaccessible for many, even with Roe in place. The Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization decision was an inflection point, unleashing chaos and fear across this nation. Our experts are constantly assessing this changing landscape and the increasingly robust body of evidence that illustrates the harms both caused and exacerbated by the Dobbs decision. 2 years after the decision, here is what we know. Access to abortion care is severely restricted in many parts of the country. 14 states are now enforcing total abortion bans with very limited exceptions, and many, many others have new restrictions in place. The total number of brick-and-mortar clinics providing abortion care in the U.S. declined by more than 40 between 2020 and early 2024. Banning abortion does not stop the need for abortion access, which is why many people seeking abortions post-Dobbs must overcome huge financial and logistical barriers to get care, especially those in states with total or early gestational bans. The number of Americans traveling out of state for abortions doubled from 81,000 in 2020 to more than 170,000 in 2023. States that border states with total abortion bans saw the sharpest increase in out-of-state patients. No one should have to travel to another state to access basic health care. And in fact, those who can't overcome the burdens of traveling for care, which for some might mean crossing multiple state lines, may be forced to stay pregnant against their will. Others may decide to self-manage their abortion. Decades of research have documented that the majority of people obtaining abortions had few financial resources, were people of color, and are already parenting. They are the ones most harshly impacted by bans and restrictions. We also know that providers are resilient and adapting to meet patient needs. While brick-and-mortar facilities provide more than 3/4 of all abortions, online clinics are expanding care options by offering medication abortion services via telehealth. Research by the Society for Family Planning shows that virtual-only telehealth abortions accounted for almost 1 in 5 abortions from October to December 2023. There are many other important ways Dobbs is interfering with reproductive health care across the nation that I won't have time to discuss in detail today. From current and future OB-GYNs not wanting to practice in banned states, to impacts on maternal health, and people facing obstetric emergencies. So what does all this mean? Overturning Roe did not resolve the debates on abortion that have characterized U.S. politics for the past 50 years. Instead, it enabled policies that have significantly worsened the harms faced by individuals who are most marginalized in our healthcare system. Still, despite these immense hardships and many people being denied care, there were more than 1 million clinician-provided abortions in 2023, a 10% increase from 2020. This is a testament to the heroic efforts of providers, abortion funds, and other support networks, to the resilience and determination of people seeking care, and to the centrality of abortion in people's lives. And it explains why the anti-abortion movement and their political allies are doubling down on even more repressive policies. For instance, this year in 4 states introduced legislation and 1 passed a law criminalizing adults who support adolescents seeking abortion care in another state. Earlier in the year, the Alabama Supreme Court's decision to classify frozen embryos as quote-unquote children wreaked havoc on fertility treatment services while advancing the anti-abortion movement's long-term goal to enshrine fetal personhood in both law and policy. These attacks on bodily autonomy, coupled with 2 major abortion cases currently before the Supreme Court, signal that the policy and legal landscape will continue to shift. The full damage caused by Dobbs will not be clear for years to come, but the evidence suggests it will not be easy to repair. That's why it's imperative that policymakers at all levels of government champion a bold vision of abortion care that goes beyond what Roe promised. Only policies rooted in evidence and human rights will guarantee that all people have meaningful access to high-quality, affordable abortion care where they live and via the method they choose. Thank you.
Dr. Linton.
Chair Sanders, Senator Murray, Ranking Member Cassidy, members of the committee. My name is Dr. Allison Linton. I'm a board-certified obstetrician and gynecologist, as well as a board-certified complex family planning specialist. I completed my medical school training, a residency in obstetrics and gynecology, a complex family planning fellowship, and a master's of public health at Northwestern University. I am now an assistant professor of obstetrics and gynecology in Milwaukee, as well as chief medical officer of Planned Parenthood of Wisconsin and a fellow at Physicians for Reproductive Health. I have spent my life learning how to provide the highest standard of care possible to my patients. But because of decisions made by people in power in rooms similar to this, in Washington and across the country, my colleagues and I can no longer provide the care we know our patients need. For the past 711 days since the Supreme Court took away the constitutional right to abortion, my patients and my colleagues have been existing in a state of chaos, confusion, and fear. In my home state of Wisconsin, a statute from 1849 remained on our books that seemed to ban abortion from the moment of conception. A law written before the Civil War and the abolition of slavery, before women had the right to vote, before the discovery of penicillin. We had questions about the enforceability of the law, but without federal protections, the penalties, a $10,000 fine and 6 years in prison, were too severe to risk. All providers in Wisconsin stopped providing abortions immediately after the Dobbs decision, with the exception of if an abortion, quote, is necessary or is advised by 2 other physicians is necessary to save the life of the mother, per the statute. For those who have no understanding of the complexities of the human body or the perils of pregnancy, this exception might seem self-explanatory. I am here to inform you, members of the committee, that it is not. On one hand, we risk medical malpractice and harming a patient if we don't act soon enough. And on the other, we risk criminal prosecution if a prosecutor feels that we acted too early. What about a patient with a newly diagnosed breast cancer at 8 weeks of pregnancy who cannot start chemotherapy or radiation while she is pregnant? Is delaying her treatment until after delivery a risk to her life? What about a patient with a blood clotting disorder, where pregnancy will further increase their risk of a pulmonary embolism or stroke? Is the risk of a blood clot enough, or do I have to wait until the actual stroke occurs? What about a 13-year-old who's the victim of incest? Is the psychological and physical trauma of carrying a child in her barely pubescent body enough to justify ending her pregnancy? And what about a mother of 3 who cannot emotionally or financially support another child? She is making a loving decision for the children she already has. Shouldn't she have just as much right and control over her body and future as any other person who needs an abortion, regardless of the reason? These are not rhetorical questions. These are real patients that I encountered and tried to care for in Wisconsin. In reality, any law that tries to delineate when an abortion is or is not permitted will never be able to fully account for the complexities of our patients' health and our patients' lives. Each patient's situation is unique, and regardless of their reason for needing an abortion, they deserve health care. Since June 24, 2022, pregnancy in the United States is far more dangerous. For patients with medical complexities, yes, but also for people with abusive partners, for people who may not understand what is happening to their bodies, for Black women who die from pregnancy and childbirth 3 times as often as white women. And it will only get more dangerous. The fear of not being able to provide care for patients is leading practitioners to move away from states with abortion bans and restrictions, or to stop treating pregnant patients. It's made recruiting providers more difficult. I have had students request transfer to another state to finish their training. This means that there is less sexual and reproductive health care where it is most desperately needed. After a ruling from a state judge on our 1849 law, we started providing abortion again in Wisconsin in late 2023, but we still work under medically unnecessary restrictions. These restrictions include a 24-hour waiting period, a same provider requirement, and a ban on telemedicine abortion. They do nothing but make it harder for patients to get the care they need, especially those that live in rural areas of the state. Abortion bans mean that there is no longer a standard of care for pregnant patients. They are getting the care based on the state that they live in. In the wealthiest country in the world, this is what we're subjecting pregnant people to: chaos, confusion, and fear. And my patients deserve so much better. Thank you.
Dr. Francis?
Thank you, Chairman Sanders, Ranking Member Dr. Cassidy, and Senator Murray, and members of the committee. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you today. As a board-certified OBGYN hospitalist who manages both high and low-risk pregnancies and has delivered thousands of babies, I really do have the best job in the world. Not only do I have the distinct honor and privilege to be with women and their families during the most exciting, challenging, and sometimes heartbreaking times of their lives, not only do I get to help usher little lives into the outside world for the first time, but I also serve as an advocate for both my maternal and fetal patients. One of the reasons those of us at this table likely chose the specialty of obstetrics was because of the challenge of taking care of 2 patients at once. Induced abortion, which intentionally ends the life of one of those patients, is not healthcare. It is not performed by the vast majority of OBGYNs, and it actively harms our patients. Thankfully, in most circumstances, the lives of our 2 patients benefit one another, and our mantra of healthy mom, healthy baby is a reality. There are, however, still situations in which a pregnancy complication can endanger the mother's life. While these most often occur after the point of fetal viability, currently approximately 22 weeks of pregnancy, they can occur before this point. The decision to intervene in these situations is extremely difficult and not one that any of us take lightly. I have sat on the edge of my patient's bed crying with her as we discussed why we couldn't wait even 1 or 2 more weeks when her baby might survive to deliver her. In these discussions, we recognize that our intent in intervening is to save the mother's life, with the unintended consequence of our fetal patient losing his or her life. An induced abortion occurs when the goal is to end our fetal patient's life. In my nearly 2 decades of practice, I have never performed an induced abortion, and have also seen most of my colleagues provide excellent care to women, even in difficult circumstances, without abortion as well. There's been a lot of false information being spread that laws limiting abortion will prevent these life-saving treatments. But honestly, this is absurd. Not only do no state laws prohibit these treatments, but even state laws restricting abortion before Roe allowed for them. The more than 7,000 members of APLOG, along with the remainder of the 93% of OBGYNs who do not perform abortions, know that induced abortion does not need to be legal in order to ensure we can provide our patients with excellent health care. Women deserve fully informed consent and ongoing medical care. This is yet another point of agreement we should have at this table. However, the same abortion advocates who are positing that women will die from ectopic pregnancies if states restrict abortion are the people who have, for the last several years, been advocating for women to receive abortion drugs without first being seen by a physician, which is critical to ensure they do not have an ectopic pregnancy, which occur in 1 in 50 pregnancies and are the leading cause of maternal mortality in the first trimester. This is not good medical care, and women seeking abortions deserve the same level of health care as any other woman. Induced abortion has no health benefits to our patients. It ends the life of one and often causes significant harm to the other. For example, there are more than 160 studies that show an increased risk of preterm birth in future pregnancies after surgical abortions. Having sat with a patient during the loss of her 5th child due to extreme prematurity after having surgical abortions with her first 2 pregnancies, I can tell you that this is devastating for women and their families. Abortion also leads to a significant increased risk of adverse mental health outcomes. The vast majority of the literature on this issue shows long-lasting mental health effects from abortion, including depression, anxiety, drug abuse, and suicide for at least 20 to 30% of women. When our country is already facing a mental health crisis, we should be minimizing things that contribute to, not encouraging them. As OBGYNs, we love caring for both our patients. We all desire for women to have the best possible health care and for them and their children to have the best chance to pursue their goals and dreams. Pro-life laws have not created a women's healthcare nightmare. The idea that induced abortion is the only way women can be successful or healthy has. We now have the opportunity to change course, and I invite my colleagues at the table, the thousands of OBGYNs across this country, and you, senators, to lead the way as we empower women with accurate information, exceptional health care, and better solutions for our maternal patients than ending the lives of their own children. Thank you so much.
Ms. Ohden?
Chairman Sanders, Ranking Member Cassidy, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to today's hearing. I am Melissa Ohden, the survivor of a failed saline infusion abortion and the founder and CEO of the Abortion Survivors Network. Babies survived abortions before Roe versus Wade. We survived during Roe versus Wade, and babies are still surviving abortions no matter where or how the abortion is performed. These experiences highlight the fundamental and undeniable humanity of the preborn and the needs, fears, and experiences of their mothers. I appreciate this opportunity to have a serious conversation about this issue and for stories that highlight the impact of abortion to be told. Earlier this year, the Washington Post wrote a story about a woman named Evelyn that I want to share with you today. Evelyn's trips to abortion clinics ended differently than expected. 2 separate attempts with medication abortion failed, and she was found to be too far along to abort a 3rd time. If we're going to talk about women's experiences with abortion, then we need to include these stories in this discussion as well. I empathize with Evelyn's shock at discovering that her first medication abortion failed. As directly quoted, she fainted when she saw that there was a heartbeat on the ultrasound and was in and out of consciousness for about 5 minutes. As a journalist, Amber Ferguson wrote with an honesty I appreciate, Evelyn says she didn't know that the pill sometimes didn't work. She later learned that 3% of medication abortions fail when the gestation reaches 70 days or 10 weeks, according to the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. I can tell you that the Abortion Survivors Network hears these stories from women time and again. They're shocked to discover they're still pregnant with the baby they attempted to abort. They try to keep it a secret and often navigate it alone. Whether they continue the pregnancy or attempt another abortion or multiple abortions, as Evelyn did. As directly quoted, desperate Evelyn found a website, Aid Access, that shipped abortion medication across the country. After speaking with a doctor by phone and paying $150, she waited for pills that were being mailed from India. This second course of abortion drugs also failed to end her pregnancy. Evelyn's story and her daughter's story, her daughter's life wasn't over yet. As the article continues, she found a clinic in Albuquerque that offered 2nd trimester abortions. She was approaching the 3rd trimester. The clinic staff warned about the health risks of having a surgical abortion so late in her pregnancy, but helped connect her to 2 abortion organizations that covered the cost of her plane ticket, hotel, food, and the $12,000 procedure. We need to pause here and truly consider Evelyn and her daughter. The support she was offered after the failure of 2 medication abortions was to pay for a plane ticket, lodging, food, and a $12,000 abortion that posed risks to her health. This is an abysmal response to Evelyn and her baby. Evelyn needed emotional support, medical and mental health care, financial assistance. Evelyn's baby, like me, deserved more than to be subjected to yet another attempt to end her life. Could you imagine a child in your own life being subjected to so-called medical interventions intended to weaken, starve, burn, or dismember them limb by limb until they die? This is the reality of abortion, and we should be ashamed of it. Evelyn was found to be 32 weeks pregnant. According to Southwestern Women's Options, the clinic's doctors aren't trained to perform abortions after 24 weeks. Evelyn soon thereafter gave birth to her daughter, and she made an adoption plan, an option they both can live with. The nightmare here is not abortion bans. The nightmare is that abortion continues to be aggressively promoted so that it is seen as the only option, like a plane ticket and $12,000 for a late-term abortion. I ask each of you to consider how different women's and children's lives, families, our society could be if just as much money was spent to provide financial assistance, housing, education and employment support, childcare, medical and mental health care. This would lead to a new era of women's empowerment that ends the generational trauma of abortion. This doesn't have to be a dream. We can make it a reality.
Thank you to all of our witnesses. We will now begin a round of 5-minute questions, and I'll ask my colleagues to keep track of your clock and stay within those 5 minutes. Maddie, I want to start with you. First off, thank you so much for being here today, telling your story. I know it is not easy, and it takes a lot of courage to be here in front of all these people to talk about something so personal to you. We really appreciate it. You touched upon in your remarks many hoops that you had to jump through just to be able to get your abortion, including traveling, I think you said, over 700 miles, round trip, away from your home in Texas to Mississippi. Talk a little bit about how you felt when you were forced to drive 13 hours out of state to get care. What was going through your head?
Thank you so much for that question, Senator. There was a lot going through my mind when I was having to go through the travel. Like I said in my testimony, I was extremely anxious and sleep deprived, so a little bit delirious in the part of just wanting to sleep and feel relaxed. I felt very on edge, constantly fearing what would be thrown at me next.
How'd you feel after receiving care in Mississippi on the way back home?
When I was able to get my abortion and receive care, that was the first time I was able to sleep more than 3 hours. And I woke up and I looked at my mom and I started crying because I was like, I got to sleep. I can finally breathe. And this huge weight just lifted off my chest.
It was your life and your choice.
Absolutely.
Dr. Francis, I have a question for you, and I want a simple yes or no. Do you believe that women should have access to Plan B? Yes or no?
I believe that women deserve to have accurate information about their
I'm not
health care.
asking you that question. Do you believe that women should have access to Plan B?
I think that women should be given any medication under the supervision of a
So
physician.
you support access to Plan B?
I support women having access to accurate information and care from a physician.
Do you believe that women should have access to medication abortion? Just yes or no?
Chemical abortion are dangerous,
no?
high-risk drugs.
So no. Do you believe women should have access to IUDs? Yes or no?
I believe that, again, women should receive comprehensive health care under the
Access to-
direction of a physician.
Access to IUDs? Do you believe women should have access to IUDs? Yes or no?
I believe that women should have access to OBGYN physicians who can counsel them
I-
about all of their
Take
options.
that as a no. And I want to ask you for the record today, do you think that IUDs and emergency contraceptives are abortifacients? Yes or no?
So if you look at the package inserts for, such as the copper IUD, it actually clearly states that they do prevent implantation even if fertilization has occurred,
so
which
do
would
you
classify that as an abortifacient, yes,
do you believe
per the
that?
package insert.
Okay. I just want to, for the record, say, Dr. Francis, your organization has taken the mind-boggling position in defiance of nearly all medical experts that abortion is never necessary to save a woman's life. According to resources that were put out by your organization, you recommend that in cases of dangerous pregnancy complications like a massive placental abruption, women should be forced to labor for 24 hours, even if that means being treated with blood transfusions in intensive care, and even if their pregnancy is non-viable in the first place, just so they can deliver a, quote, intact fetus. It has also been well documented how your organization is working behind the scenes with Republican lawmakers to redefine certain kinds of contraceptives as abortions, so you can ultimately ban those types of contraceptions. I think that is incredibly alarming. And it's really important for people to understand the Republican minority has specifically invited you to this hearing today despite those dangerous positions. For the information of all senators, we are going to be voting this week on the right to contraception, and I hope everyone truly thinks about what that means for women and how it would change our entire country and our women's rights moving forward across the board. So I just wanted to make that very clear. And I just have a few seconds left, Dr. Verma, really quickly. Many states, yours included, require a lot of time, a lot of consulting, a lot of multiple trips to doctors. How does that affect the healthcare system in general?
It immensely affects the healthcare system to make basic medical decisions about whether we can provide care to a patient in front of us. We're often having to involve legal representatives, hospital administration. That creates delays in care instead of just being able to provide the care that we know is right for the patient sitting in front of us.
Thank you. And I am out of time, so I will turn it to Senator Cassidy.
And I'll defer to Senator Mullins.
Thank you, and thank you, Chairwoman. I just want to actually commend everybody for actually having a good conversation here. I expected this to actually be pretty rambunctious, and so for that, I'm probably going to leave a lot of my questions out because I really did. I came here to be punchy. And instead, I think it's important that I share a story, and then I do have a couple questions too, because I do appreciate everybody's opinion, and that's what this is about having a conversation. And I think put in a context of why I'm so pro-life may help a little bit of understand our positions, right? I've been married for 27 years. I got married when I was 19. My wife was 18. First question my father-in-law asked me when I asked to marry my wife, Christy, is she pregnant? And I was like, no, I don't think so. And it's 7 years later, we were still trying to have kids. And my wife had endometriosis, and it took a long time to have kids. We went through everything you can think of, in vitro, through shots, through you can imagine. And then she got pregnant, and that was my Christmas gift one year. I got it out of my stocking. It was quite an exciting time. And we went through the pregnancy. We went to the first doctor visit, and how excited it was. And then we went later on, and we heard the heartbeat the first time. And I'm going to tell you, that was a child to me. I mean, I was so excited. We were thinking of names. We were going through the whole process, and man, I can't tell you the excitement I heard. I literally, I'm not even a crier at that time. Now I talk about my kids, I cry all the time. But I remember getting emotional for the first time, and I was thinking, what is this inside of me? A tear about ready to drop out of my eyes. But then, while through the pregnancy, she went back in and she had a miscarriage. That was a death to us. 100% death to us. So no one will say that wasn't a death to us. That was a death. That was a child when I heard the heartbeat, and it was a death when we didn't hear the heartbeat. And it was extremely difficult for my wife and I. Fortunately, literally the month that child was due to be born, we found out we were pregnant again. And his name's Jim Martin Mullen, named after my dad. 15 months later, we had another one, because people that tell you can't get pregnant when breastfeeding lies, because you can. And his name's Andrew Daniel Mullen. 3 years later, after the doctor said she couldn't get pregnant anymore and she was going to have a hysterectomy, we had another one. And her name is Lara. She's 15, Lara Dale Mullen. And Lord, she's 15. And love her to death. And then my wife and I decided we wasn't going to have kids anymore. And I got a vasectomy, and she got an ablation. And yet we still collected 3 more kids. Because there was 3 kids that deserved a home and 2 mothers that loved those children so much, instead of aborting them, they were brave enough to carry them and gave Christy and I an opportunity to love these 3 wonderful kids. 2 twins named Ivy and Lynette that we'd adopted when they were 2 years old, and now they're 13. And Jace, who is wrestling at Oklahoma State as we speak. I was in Ohio with him this week, and his mother was just barely 20 years old, and the twins' mother was 15 when she got pregnant. And I thank God every day, literally every day, that those mothers gave Christy and I an opportunity to be blessed and be loved by these 3 kids. And so there's options. What's sad is when you look at statistically speaking is that over 50% of the pregnancies inside the United States is unplanned. But 50% of all pregnancies also end in abortion. That's sad. I mean, you're lucky to be born right now. And inside DC is 51.5% of all pregnancies. Meaning we end more pregnancies here in Washington, D.C. than we actually have. Something's wrong. Abortion has become almost a point of convenience. While we understand it's unplanned, we get that, but that child deserves an opportunity to be in a loving home just like my 3 kids are. I tell everybody we had 3 we got stuck with and 3 we chose. Which ones do you think we love the most? I'm blessed. Christy and I are blessed. But we got to talk about the reality here. And we're not talking about rape and incest and high-risk births. Those account for less than 9.5% of all births out there. 8% are high risk. 1% are rape. Less than 0.5% are from incest. We're not talking about those abortions. We're talking about others. Guys, we can do better as a country, and that's what this conversation is about. We have to talk about it. Just give these kids an opportunity to live. They'll bless somebody, because our kids bless us every single day. That I yield back.
Senator Sanders.
Let me thank all of the panelists for their testimony. I think we can all agree that the issue we're discussing today is an emotional issue. It is a difficult issue, and sincere people have different points of view on the issue. I would like to direct my questioning to Drs. Verma and Linton and ask them this. No doubt you have experienced women and their partners who have jumped for joy when they learned that they were pregnant, and you did everything you could to make sure that the pregnancy was successful. I suspect you have also met with many women who, for a variety of reasons, whatever they may be, health reasons, economic reasons, did not jump for joy when they learned that they were pregnant. My question to you is a pretty simple one. I'm assuming that you have worked with people, all walks of life, all economic levels, races, so forth. Who do you think is best prepared to make the decision about the future of that pregnancy? Is it people in a legislature, generally speaking, often dominated by men? Or would it be the people who are feeling the impact of that pregnancy? So understanding, I would suspect you've never told anybody they should not have an abortion, right? We respect people's different points of view. Who should make that decision based on your experience, Dr. Verma?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Based on my experience, people are the experts in their own lives and are able to make these really complicated decisions about their own lives. And I want to say I appreciate Senator Mullin sharing that story. I myself have struggled with infertility, and I've experienced a first trimester miscarriage that I found devastating. And so I am not at all saying that pregnancies don't have value. That value is different for different people, and the way that people connect with their pregnancies is different, and each person is capable of making these really important, sometimes complex, sometimes difficult decisions about their health care and their life, even if that sometimes means ending a pregnancy.
Dr. Linton, on this enormously personal decision,
Yeah,
should
I
it
would-
be a state legislature that makes it for every woman in the state, or should it be the woman herself?
I agree wholeheartedly with Dr. Verma. I think this is a decision that only the patient can make. Every single patient situation is unique. Our patients live very complicated lives. And I think that we have to trust them. Our job as physicians is to meet patients where they are, provide them the information that they need, and then support them in whatever decision they make for themselves and for their futures.
All right, let me ask the doctors again. If you were a young physician wanting to practice medicine, would you gravitate to a state which has a harsh anti-abortion law?
Yeah, thank you. This is really difficult for me. I'm from the South. I love the South. It is my home, and it has been really hard to grapple with wanting to serve my community, but being in an environment where I have to face threats of criminal prosecution, of having my license removed for simply providing medicine. And so I have had thoughts about leaving, even though I love my home and my community, and I talk to medical students and residents every day who are in that same position. They love the South, they're from the South, but are choosing to leave because they can't get the training and they can't practice in the way that
At a
they
time
need
when
to.
there is already a shortage of physicians in that area, correct?
Yes, and in Georgia, 50% of counties do not have an OBGYN. And as doctors leave, that doesn't just affect access to abortion care. It affects access to all types of care, to prenatal care, to miscarriage management. I often already at the hospital I work at see patients coming to labor and delivery who have received no prenatal care because they haven't had access to that care. That's just going to get worse and worse and make pregnancy riskier and more dangerous.
Dr. Linton, your experience regarding that?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that the concerns that I hear from trainees are sort of twofold. The first is similar to what Dr. Verma was speaking about, wanting to make sure they receive that comprehensive training. They want to be able to go into practice and feel prepared that they can provide whatever care is necessary to serve their patients. But I think it's also important to remember most of our trainees are of reproductive age, and they also need to think about what would happen if they experienced an unintended pregnancy or an unexpected health outcome. So yeah, I have heard from many of my trainees concerns about staying in state, or certainly about thinking about these restrictions when deciding where they aim to practice in the future.
Thanks. Thank you.
Senator Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Ohden, thank you for sharing your story. Thank you all. It's a very difficult topic, and this is part of that dialogue. And so thank you all. Ms. Ohden, I understand that you have a child with special needs. Can you relate the counseling you received where you suggested that you get an abortion, or how can you relate that?
I do appreciate everyone sharing such personal stories. I think this is part of what we need to do is share our stories more, but listen more as well, no matter what side of the aisle we're sitting on. Not only am I someone who survived an attempt to end my life at approximately 31 weeks gestation by a saline infusion abortion, I am also a woman who has had a first trimester miscarriage and have felt that pain. And not just myself, my husband as well. I remember his pain so distinctly. I also have a child who was born with complex medical needs. I was 36 years old, fast approaching 37. And so even prior to finding out that my daughter had a prenatal diagnosis, I was being pressured time and time again with conversations about abortion because of my advanced maternal age at 36. To the point that even prior to my 20-week ultrasound, I had to call up the OBGYN's office and let them know that I found it so offensive for them to continue to state abortion time and time again based on my own personal history, that I was asking they not do it again or I would need to go to another practice. I can tell you my daughter is almost 10. She is an incredible young woman who has overcome a lot, and she is raised to know that she has the same dignity and value as everyone else in the room, that everyone is made differently. And yes, some of us see different doctors for different health issues at different times, but she is someone who experiences incredible joy and is living a great life.
Thank you. Dr. Francis, I think that Senator Murray was suggesting that you were trying to duck her question when you said that people needed to be counseled, but your testimony is very nuanced. Now, some of the testimony we've heard has suggested somehow that women, particularly minority women, particularly African-American women, their health, their long-term outcome is hurt by not having ready access to abortion. And yet you quote data, and I just compliment you on just how this is chock full of references and studies. It's like a white paper. Can you give a little bit more nuance about how someone should be counseled that abortion does not necessarily save a life? In some ways, it brings further complications.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Senator Cassidy, for that question. As you said, we do see disparate health outcomes in this country, unfortunately, especially in minority women. But we also see that Black women have a much higher rate of abortion than do white women, and this has not improved their health outcomes. In fact, their maternal mortality rates are worse. Their preterm birth rates are worse, and as I stated, there are more than 160 studies that show a link between surgical abortions and preterm birth. In fact, the patient whose story...
Between surgical abortion and preterm birth?
And preterm birth and future pregnancies, yes. In fact, the Institute of Medicine has acknowledged that surgical-induced abortions are an immutable risk factor for preterm birth and future pregnancies.
So the increased loss of unborn or miscarried children in some may be, you're saying, there may be a causation associated with their previous history of abortion?
Correct. That's what the study suggests.
Is there academic literature supporting that?
100%. There are very large systematic reviews, and as I said, the Institute of Medicine has acknowledged this as well.
So when you say, in response to Senator Murray, that someone should be counseled, they should be counseled.
Absolutely. In fact, that patient that I sat with who had lost her 5th child due to a condition called cervical insufficiency, where her uterus literally could not hold a baby in to the point of viability anymore. One of the things I thought about is...
Just because we have limited time, and you also quote data showing that in countries that have prohibited abortion after previously not allowing it, maternal mortality has not worsened, suggesting that this kind of idea that abortion saves women's lives has not been borne out by empiric experience.
Correct.
Okay. Dr. Linton, I could have asked a couple of you of this. In your testimony, you say something along the lines that suggesting that there shouldn't be any restriction. But I go back to that child. Now, we know it's rare for someone late term without a reason to have a child like this aborted. But it does occur. And in 9 states plus a city in which we are currently, it's allowed. Does this child really have no rights whatsoever? I mean, should that child, knowing, I'm giving you the hypothesis, the mama does not have a risk, this is just a decision to abort. Is there no consideration to be given of this? Because I have to understand, we have to have a dialogue, but I'm seeing if there's actually a common ground here. Your mic, please.
Thank you, Senator Cassidy, for that question. You know, I think that these sort of extreme hypotheticals really get us away from
This
the
occurs,
reality.
and it's legal, and this side, the Democratic aisle, actually wants that to be the law of the land.
I think what you are describing
And so
is...
my question is, because now I'm going to just say Senator Murray thought Dr. Francis was trying to duck. Maybe it's a yes or no. A yes or no, if it's not for the health of the mama, the life of the mama, et cetera, should this child have no rights in the decision to abort at week 40, when otherwise, if the child was delivered, the child would be alive?
So, Senator Cassidy, respectfully, I don't think this is a question that we can whittle down to a yes or no. I think pregnancy is much more complicated than that.
So does they have a right? Then do they have a right?
I would say that every situation is unique, and when a patient
And I will say at
presents-
this point, the inability to answer that is troubling. And with that, I yield, because I'm a minute over, I'm sorry.
Senator Casey.
I want to start, I was going to ask a question of Dr. Verma and Dr. Linton. Anything else you wanted to say in response?
Thank you, Senator. No, I was simply going to say that I think every situation is unique, and our job as physicians is to take all of the information that a patient provides us and give them the option to decide what is best for themselves and for their bodies. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll start with Dr. Verma. I want to go to Dr. Verma. And page 1 of your testimony, you say, and I quote, I've seen young moms with worsening medical conditions that make their pregnancies very high risk, and couples whose deeply desired pregnancies are in the process of miscarrying be turned away or forced to leave their communities to access needed health care, unquote. Tell me how that reality that has surfaced most recently, tell Tell me how that reality has affected your ability to care for your patients, number one. And number two, how has your relationship with those patients changed?
Thank you for that question. It has been devastating to have to look at patients and say, I can't help you, I can't provide this care, or I have to wait for you to get sicker before I can potentially provide this care. And it creates a huge amount of mistrust that patients have for both the healthcare system and the government. There is not a line in the sand where someone goes from being totally fine to acutely dying. It's often a continuum. And even when state laws like Georgia's have exceptions for things like medical emergency, it's unclear to us as the doctors when we can intervene. I also do, if I could just take a second to go back to Dr. Cassidy's point here, I just really want to highlight that the situation of doing an abortion at the moment of birth doesn't happen. As a doctor who provides full spectrum reproductive health care, including OB care, I love taking care of people on labor and delivery. I provide abortion care. That doesn't happen. It is a false hypothetical that is meant to create additional stigma around abortion care. If a patient comes in at 40 weeks, their options are a C-section and a vaginal delivery, and this misinformation is really dangerous to our patients. I also just want to highlight that 90% of abortions in this country occur in the first trimester, and less than 1% are occurring after 20 weeks, when in most cases something has gone terribly wrong with the patient or the pregnancy, and that person really needs that care for some reason.
Doctor, thank you. And I want to turn to Dr. Linton for her, to make reference to her testimony. I'm looking at both pages, the bottom of page 2 and the top of page 3. On page 2, you pose this question: when would an abortion be necessary, quote, to save the life of the mother, unquote? And you point to a couple of examples. What about a patient who presents with heavy bleeding in the first trimester, but there is still fetal cardiac activity on ultrasound? Can I remove the pregnancy to stop the bleeding? Do I have to wait for a certain amount of blood loss, you say, unquote. Then you continue at the top of the page with a few more examples. A pregnant patient with unresolved congestive heart failure from her last pregnancy that puts her at higher risk of dying in this pregnancy. What % chance of death does she need? Next question. What about a patient with a newly diagnosed breast cancer at 8 weeks of pregnancy who cannot start chemotherapy or radiation while she is pregnant? Is delaying her treatment until after delivery a risk to her life? And finally, at least of the examples I'm pointing out, what about a patient with a blood clotting disorder where pregnancy will further increase the risk of a pulmonary embolism or stroke? Is the risk of a blood clot enough, or do I have to wait until the actual stroke occurs, unquote? And you go on from there with other examples, and you say, these are real patients that my colleagues and I have encountered. I'd ask you the same question. How has that reality, since the Dobbs decision, changed your ability to care for your patients and your relationship with your patients?
Thank you for that. I think I would go back to that same idea of this culture now of confusion and fear. All of those cases that I mentioned in both in my oral and written testimony, those are real patients that I have encountered, that my partners and I debated. Did we meet this arbitrary phrase from an 1849 law or not? Do we need to call lawyers? Do we have to consult other physicians? We were not able to just follow the medicine in these cases, and adding words such as imminent death or immediate death, that doesn't help clarify anything further. So I would reiterate what Dr. Verma said. These are impacting our ability to care for the patients in front of us in a timely and appropriate way.
Thank you.
Senator Budd.
No, Murkowski's next.
Ooh, she came in after.
Please.
Okay. You're
Good, we're good, we're
Please.
good.
Yeah.
We'll all get an opportunity. I want to thank you all for being here, for your testimony, and for sharing deeply personal stories. As has been repeated here, and we know to be true. Access to reproductive care, the issue of abortion itself, a decision to terminate a pregnancy is deeply, deeply personal. It's complicated, and clearly there are views that Americans have on this issue that present deep and conflicting convictions. And so just the ability, the opportunity to have true discussion and conversation about it, I think, is important. I have been pretty clear where I stand on this issue. I think the choice to have an abortion should ultimately be in the hands of the woman, of the individual, not the government. But I also believe that it's reasonable not to require those who are firmly opposed to abortion to support it with their tax dollars, and that providers who do not wish to be involved in abortion should not be forced to do so. And that's why I've worked with several other colleagues here, Senator Collins, Kane, Sinema, and I have this bipartisan legislation to ensure that the rights that women have relied on for the past 50 some odd years, those that were set out in Roe and in Griswold, are protected. I think that they should be protected. We establish a federal right to choose and reaffirm the right to contraceptive access without raising concerns about religious freedom and provider conscience protections. So my position on this is clear, but I'm also pretty clear-eyed in recognizing that it's unlikely that the Congress is going to pass legislation that would establish clearly that right to abortion, certainly in this Congress. But I will tell you, I continue to hear from so many in my state, women in Alaska, who are concerned about access to abortion, access to reproductive services, even while we are a state where we have included in our state's constitution a right to privacy that protects that access to abortion. But what we have seen from decisions across the country in the lower 48 is a ripple effect that has come all the way up to the north. Planned Parenthood in Soldotna, Alaska location closed in anticipation of the trigger laws that were coming online that would require more resources in other states. So we think that we are far enough away that we're protected, that access is protected, but there are implications that move beyond those state boundaries. And so women are asking me about access. We are a very, very rural state in the first place. Access to providers is limited in the first place, and certainly access to abortion has also been limited. And I'm going to throw this out to anybody on the panel. What can we do practically right now to help ameliorate some of what we are seeing with the impact of the Dobbs decision to ensure that women do have access to the care that they need now? I wasn't here when you presented your testimony, Ms. Anderson, but I can't imagine how difficult when you are when you're already in a very stressful situation, the thought that I might have to travel hundreds of miles, incur extraordinary expenses to travel, but the access to care is so limited. I've given you no time to answer, but does anybody have, Ms. Lopez, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer. Thank you for the question and for the describing the experience in Alaska. I mean, I think one of the things we can do, Senator, is ensure that we can maintain access to medication abortion, right? Medication abortion now accounts for 2/3 of all abortions in this country as of 2023. And in rural areas like yours, it's incredibly important to have that option via telehealth for folks who can't reach a provider or when they live in communities, as the doctor said, that don't have providers, given the limited access to providers that they have. And so maintaining access to a method that we know is safe and effective based on decades of widespread use and study, I think becomes critically important.
Thank you for saying that. I absolutely agree. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Senator Murray. Thank you all for being here today and for your testimony. In Connecticut, we often hear from our physicians that we should not labor under the belief that there are safe states. Right? Connecticut is a state today that protects the right to full reproductive health care for women, for families. But we know what the agenda is. We know that the agenda of Republicans in the Senate and Congress is to pass a national abortion ban, and we are potentially months or years away from losing those protections in Connecticut. But the doctors in my state tell me that this myth of the safe state is also due to the fact that the bans that are being passed in states that aren't Connecticut are fundamentally changing the practice of medicine and medical knowledge in the United States. So Senator Sanders started to explore, I think, this really important issue, but I wanted to build on his questioning. And I think I have two questions to ask, and maybe I'll pose the first one to Dr. Verma and Dr. Linton. What does it mean that we now have a growing number of states that are not training physicians in the suite of services related to pregnancy loss? What does it mean that we have physicians today that are emerging from education in those states that potentially do not have the full scope of training on how to manage medical challenges like miscarriages or complications such as infections or hemorrhaging that could stem from pregnancy loss? This seems like a significant challenge for our country. How is medical education changing when you have so many residents and medical students who are simply not getting the same kind of comprehensive education around reproductive health care?
Thank you for that question. Over 50% of OBGYN residencies are in states that have enacted bans or very restrictive abortion laws, and that's absolutely affecting resident training and medical student training. I think it's important to highlight here that it's the same procedures, the same medications that we use when we're providing abortion care that we also use when someone comes in experiencing a miscarriage or experiencing a pregnancy loss. And so it's very concerning that more and more doctors are not going to be able to provide all options for care to someone who comes in, for example, at 14 weeks bleeding after breaking their water and is sick and needs care. And so I absolutely think this is going to affect the ability for people to get all types of care across the country. It's particularly going to affect women in rural areas in certain parts of the country, and I think that's really devastating when we're already experiencing such a healthcare crisis and maternal mortality crisis.
Dr. Linton.
I agree with Dr. Verma. I will say, immediately after the Dobbs decision, there are certain requirements that trainees have to achieve, or things that they have to learn in order to satisfy the requirements of residency training, specifically in OBGYN. And I can tell you that in the immediate aftermath of Dobbs, trying to find places for those learners to go and receive that training was incredibly difficult. As you mentioned, one of the safe states or haven states, not only are these states being asked to take care of an influx of patients, we are also asking them to take care of an influx of learners. And all of that is just being compounded and compounded. So I agree with Dr. Verma. I am concerned about the future of our ability of our workforce to be able to care for patients in a variety of settings.
Well, Ms. Lopez, let me ask you that question about the broader workforce challenge, because, our state reports that we are seeing an influx of individuals for training. But what we also know is that in states that have passed these abortion bans, they have seen a 10% decline in applications for OBGYN residencies. And we're not seeing a 10% increase in our states, in part because we have a set number of residency slots. That's not going to change overnight. And so the net effect here, at a moment when we were already desperate for more individuals to go into this care, seems to be a doubling down of a workforce crisis that is going to affect every woman and every family across this country, no matter which state you live in.
Absolutely. Thanks, Senator, for that question. Absolutely. And these folks are not just providing abortion care, right? They're providing the full range of reproductive care, which means that if you are seeking prenatal care or contraception or IVF or any of a number of reproductive care options, you will not have those providers available. We already have maternity care deserts around this country. Those will only increase as well. And I think it also forces doctors to think about, do they want to risk criminalization for providing, this standard medical care, this basic medical care?
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Budd.
Thank you. I thank the panel and for your story and testimonies. So after the Biden administration's FDA, it ended in-person dispensing requirements. As I understand, chemical drugs are now routinely available without any medical supervision. So Dr. Francis, can you tell us about abortion reversal pills and why it's important for states to make sure that pregnant women have access to information about these pills, particularly those women who are considering abortion? Dr. Francis.
Sure. Thank you, Senator Budd, for your question. If I can first just highlight the dangers of the FDA's decision to lift that in-person dispensing requirement, because that will tie into abortion pill reversal as well. What that removes from women is any kind of medical oversight. It removes the opportunity to document how far along in their pregnancy they are. Many women are wrong about how far along in their pregnancy they are, and we know that the farther along in pregnancy a woman takes those drugs, the higher the risk of complications. It also removes the possibility of adequately screening for ectopic pregnancy, and it also removes the real possibility for a woman to receive fully informed consent. That's a really important part of ensuring that before a woman takes these drugs, that she is in fact not only sure of her decision, but aware of the potential risks that she's facing by taking those drugs. And we know that now that women are receiving less counseling, more and more women are deciding after taking that first drug, the mifepristone pill, that they regret their decision and they desire to save their child's life. And I know this because I'm a member of the Abortion Pill Reversal Network. I'm a provider of that treatment, which involves giving a woman natural progesterone, which can counteract the effects of the first drug, mifepristone. And so it's essential that women are aware of this, not only because they're not receiving adequate counseling now before they receive these drugs, but so that they know if they make the choice, if we really are supportive of women having choices, we should support their choice if they decide that they regret their abortion and would like to save their child's life.
Thank you. So you're saying that there's more dangerous health outcomes with the lifting of the medical supervision, correct?
Absolutely. So even according to the FDA's own data, 1 in 25 women who take these drugs, even with medical supervision, will end up in the emergency room. But I can tell you, having gone down to the emergency room in my own hospital many times to care for women who are facing life-threatening complications after taking these drugs, it is more common now that they're not being seen in person first.
What's the window of time from taking the chemical abortion drugs to the reversal?
So it's most effective if it's taken within the first 72 hours, but especially within the first 24 hours. So it's imperative that women have this information so that they know if they change their mind that there is a treatment that they can access.
So in light of the FDA ending in-person dispensing requirements for these drugs, can you talk about how human traffickers are exploiting the lack of protections that used to exist for women?
Well, you know, we certainly know that there is a link between human trafficking and forced abortions. That's been shown very clearly. And it's also been shown that one of the main points of contact for a trafficking victim to get help is actually with a medical professional. And so what we've done now is we have removed that point of help for a woman, and we've also allowed for traffickers a way for them to be able to access these drugs online. It's been well documented that women who are not pregnant are receiving these drugs after going online and ordering them. I personally talked with a woman who was in her 60s who got these drugs. She just wanted to see if she was able to get it, and she was able to get these drugs. So it is now possible for anyone to go online, get these drugs. It is traffickers could stockpile them so that they could force them on their victims to force abortions have in the past.
Can you walk me through some of the ramifications of S 4381, given that it waives protections from the Religious Freedom Restoration Act? This is the contraception legislation that's before us right now. So I believe it's S 4381, and it waives protections from the Religious Freedom Restoration Act.
Gotcha. So thank you for the opportunity to also clarify one, I think, misunderstanding of my organization's position on contraception. So we actually don't take an official position on contraception. However, we would support the right of any physician to abstain from prescribing any medication or participating in any procedure that violated either their religious beliefs or violated their own conscience. And if they feel that it violates the oath that they took as a physician, then we would support the right for any physician to be able to abstain from prescribing those medications.
Thank you. Thank the panel.
Senator Hassan.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Murray, and to the chair and ranking member Cassidy, thank you for this hearing, and to all of the witnesses, thank you for being here today. I've received thousands of messages from constituents in New Hampshire urging me to protect reproductive freedom since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. On that day, the women of America lost a fundamental freedom. Every woman should have the right to control her own life, and that includes the right to make her own healthcare decisions. And with deep respect for my colleagues on the other side of the dais, women know what a pregnancy is. I, too, in response to Senator Mullen, I had a miscarriage at 12 weeks in a pregnancy between the birth of my son and the birth of my daughter. It was as devastating for me and my husband and our family as Senator Mullen described the devastation that he and his family experienced. So right now, though, women are facing a danger in our country that is real and it is grave. And that includes women like one of my constituents who was carrying twins and discovered in the third trimester that one of the twins could prove fatal to the other. Now think about the decision that she and her physicians had to make as they grappled with this very rare, very difficult medical challenge, and the impact of the abortion ban in New Hampshire on her and her physician as they tried to figure out what to do. So a few questions. Dr. Linton, abortion bans are impacting multiple facets of women's health care. Miscarriage is common, and as we've just talked about, it can be devastating. 1 in 5 pregnancies in the United States results in miscarriage. In places where abortion bans are in place, some women experiencing miscarriages who need immediate medical attention are being denied the health care that they need because doctors fear criminal penalties if they treat these women. So can you discuss how abortion bans are jeopardizing the health of women who are having miscarriages?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. Yes, I think that it goes back again to this idea of confusion. These laws are not written by physicians. Many of them are written before the era of modern medicine, before we had ultrasounds and modern diagnoses that we use today. So asking a physician to interpret a law, not only through a medical lens, but through a modern lens, can be very difficult. We are physicians. We are not lawyers. We did not go to medical school to make very intricate legal decisions. And so as much as sometimes I obviously my biggest concern is for the patient in that situation, and yet at the same time, I can't necessarily blame the physician for having this fear over confusion of whether or not they can provide care. We need to focus on letting physicians make medical decisions to be able to care for the patients in front of them.
Thank you. Dr. Verma, abortion bans and restrictions are even making it harder for women to get prenatal care that supports the well-being of women and their babies. It's harder than ever to recruit obstetricians, as you all have talked about, and gynecologists. to practice in rural areas across the country, especially once you factor in abortion bans, including those that could put doctors and their patients in jail. Dr. Verma, what is the impact of abortion bans on doctors who are trying to do their jobs? In particular, how are these bans limiting women's access to care in rural areas?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. I, even pre-Dobbs, was seeing patients in Georgia that were traveling significant distances to get to a hospital where they could get prenatal care, to get to a doctor who took Medicaid, if that is their insurance. And so there are multiple barriers that women are already facing. What we're seeing is as more doctors leave these states because of abortion bans, those distances that patients are having to travel are getting further and further. And patients are also scared. One of the things I do in my practice is I do preconception counseling visits where I sit down with a patient who wants to get pregnant and talk to them about how to optimize that pregnancy. So starting a prenatal vitamin, getting off any medications that are dangerous for the pregnancy. And since Dobbs, I'm hearing again and again, patients are asking, what happens if I get pregnant and something goes wrong? And these are patients with desired pregnancies. They are so afraid that something is going to go wrong and they won't be able to get the care that they need. And it's affecting people's decisions about whether to expand their family, even if that's something they want.
Absolutely. Thank you. I am almost out of time, so a quick question for Ms. Lopez. Since Roe v. Wade was overturned, it's more critical now than ever that women can access contraception. Most forms of health insurance cover birth control. However, there are nearly 1 million women of reproductive age who are enrolled in Medicare because of a disability, and they don't have guaranteed access to contraception. I'm working on a bill that will close this contraception coverage gap by requiring Medicare to cover all forms of contraception, allowing women with disabilities to get the type of contraception they want and need. Can you speak to the importance of requiring Medicare to cover contraception?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for your championship of that legislation. Yeah, it's critical for all people who can become pregnant to have access to contraception so that they can plan their families appropriately, so that they can determine if, when, and how they want to start a family. And that includes folks on the margins, including disabled people. So thank you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Senator Murray.
Thank you, Senator Marshall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Linton, how many babies have you delivered in the past month or two?
I would say probably in the 10s to 20s.
Okay. And Dr. Verma, how many babies have you delivered in the past month or two?
That's a good question. I'm terrible at estimating, but over my career, thousands.
But you're still active. You're still actively delivering babies.
Oh, yeah. I do
have a
labor and
prenatal
delivery
clinic.
shifts every week.
How often or what type of range would you do sonograms on a pregnant woman, let's say before their 4th month of pregnancy? Hardly ever, a lot, sometimes.
So yeah, I see patients with all kinds of pregnancies, and usually when a patient comes in and has a positive pregnancy test, I talk to patients that want to continue
My
those
question is, how
pregnancies.
often do you do sonograms on your routine prenatal visits before 16 weeks or so?
We usually do an initial ultrasound to confirm that the pregnancy is there.
A
to
prenatal
confirm it.
pregnancy, first visit, usually you're doing a sonogram to confirm the pregnancy. Dr. Linton, how often
Depending
are
on
you
how
doing
far
sonograms?
along they are, yeah.
In the first trimester or early second on a routine OB situation?
So to be very clear, I work on labor and delivery and I deliver babies, but I do not provide prenatal care.
Thank you. So then, Dr. Linton, you've delivered a 23, 24-week baby, I'm sure, before?
Yes.
Yeah. When that baby's delivered, you call in anesthesia, you call the NICU, you call everybody you can in to help that baby, right?
Depends on the clinical scenario. But yes, if it's a desired pregnancy and the patient has voiced the desire for resuscitation, then we have NICU present at that delivery.
And you've also done abortions at 23, 24 weeks as well?
In my training, I provide the standard of care in line with medical
I'm
laws
just
for the
asking,
state that I'm living in.
I'm sure you're not ashamed of it. You've done abortions with the babies 23, 24 weeks?
I provide the care that I'm trained to do based on the state laws where I live in.
So, and Dr. Verma, you've done abortions and you've delivered babies at 23, 24 weeks, full resuscitation. At the same time, you've done abortions on those as well.
I think what you're highlighting here is the complexity of what we do. What
No,
we
that's not
do
my
is
question. I
very
get to ask the questions here. I'm
complicated.
not asking for a lecture. How do you, is there any distress in your mind or your heart after doing an abortion? On the one hand, you're delivering a baby at 23 weeks and it's full bore, all out, resuscitate the baby, you feel horrible, it doesn't make it. Then you do an abortion on that same, how does that make you feel?
You know, I appreciate the question. I think it's a great question. And again, like I was saying, this is why this is so complicated. I feel that complexity. Like I said, I've experienced a first trimester loss myself, and I found that loss devastating. So this is complicated, but I also know that my patients are able to make these really complicated
Thank you so much. Thank
decisions
you.
about their health and
Dr.
lives.
Linton, what pregnancy category of drug is mifepristone?
I'm sorry, Senator, off the top of my head, I can't tell you the class.
Dr. Verma, you know what type of pregnancy category drug mifepristone is?
I know mifepristone is incredibly safe based on decades of data.
About misoprostol, do you know what category of drug that is in pregnancy?
I can tell you we use misoprostol for a variety of reasons, including in desired pregnancies on labor and
Understand that.
delivery every day.
So they're both category X drugs, okay? I'm going to tell you the answer. They're both category, so y'all are prescribing these drugs and you don't know what category of drug it is. And why is it a category X drug? Because it causes fetal malformations, right? So it causes fetal malformations.
And those
Right?
categories that you're describing are actually based on politics. The mifepristone is safer than Tylenol,
But you're saying the
Viagra,
FDA
multiple.
is based upon politics. The FDA is saying this is a category X drug. Would you agree with me that these abortion pills are less effective at 14 weeks as opposed to 8 weeks, Dr. Lindman?
Dr. Linton, I would say that our data does support with increasing gestational ages that sometimes we have to modify the protocol, but generally
effective.
they
They're
are
less
more
effective.
effective at earlier gestational ages
Right.
depending on the protocol you
So what
use.
I'm confused about is and I've never prescribed this drug. I've taken care of lots of patients that have complications from these drugs. I'm confused why you do a sonogram in a routine pregnancy to establish gestational age. That's the main reason you're doing pregnancies in the first trimester, early second trimester, because the spine's not developed, the heart's not developed. So you're basically doing it for gestational age. You're recognizing that so many women come in and they're a month off of their gestational age. So why wouldn't you want to do a sonogram on every person you see before you prescribe this drug, realizing that it has decreased effectiveness at 14 weeks than 10 weeks, so therefore you're prescribing a category X drug to a pregnancy that's probably not going that has a possibility of not being aborted. So you're increasing the risk of fetal anomalies. It just doesn't add up to me. Why are you scared to do a sonogram? Wouldn't you think if you were doing an abortion procedure on a 12-weeker versus a baby that's actually 20 weeks that it would change everything? I'm just appalled that why you all are so afraid of doing sonograms. Thank you so much, and I yield back.
I'll allow you time. I'll allow you time to answer that question, Dr. Verma.
Thank you. And I will say, as a doctor who actually does provide this care to patients and is currently practicing, we actually often do sonograms if there's any questions. So when we see a patient and we're providing medication abortion via telemedicine, we go through screening questionnaires, and if there's any concern, we absolutely do a sonogram. So that isn't really an accurate representation of how this practice of medicine works.
Thank you. Senator Smith.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. I'm appreciating very much all of you being here. I want to just follow up a little bit on the question about medication abortion. So mifepristone has been lawfully prescribed to patients since 2000. I'll just ask Dr. Verma, how safe is medication abortion and how effective is it?
Thank you for that question. Medication abortion is incredibly safe and effective. In a recent study of 20,000 patients that have undergone medication abortion, the rate of adverse events was 0.38%, so very, very low. Only about 1% of those patients came to the emergency room after the process, and of those people, about 40% didn't need any treatment.
Okay.
So we know that medication abortion is incredibly safe and effective. And I also want to highlight how dangerous misinformation about the practice of medicine is for our patients, for physicians. The American Board of OBGYNs, which is the board that certifies all of us OBGYNs at this table, has asserted that abortion care is safe, is effective, that medication abortion is safe, that abortion reversal is not something that we can, in good faith, offer to our patients because it can cause serious risks of bleeding and hemorrhage, and that abortion care does not cause preterm birth. And so I just want to highlight some of that misinformation that we've heard today because it can be very dangerous and contradicts what the American Board of OBGYNs and American College of OBGYNs asserts.
We've heard a few things also today about abortion reversal drugs, saline abortions. Is there any misinformation that you'd like to clear up there as well?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Saline abortions is not something that is done in the practice of modern medicine. I have been practicing for about a decade, have never seen or heard it. So that is not a practice that is done. For abortion reversal, my colleagues and I actually studied whether this is a treatment that we could offer to our patients, because if it was a safe treatment and a patient wanted it, I'd be happy to offer it. I am happy to support my patients who want to continue a pregnancy, end a pregnancy, whatever is right for them. And we found we had to stop that study early because people were experiencing significant bleeding and were at risk. And so it is not a safe treatment that is available to patients. That is misinformation.
Thank you. And maybe I'll ask Dr. Linton this. There's been, I'd like to ask you about this question about whether telemedicine for medication abortion is also safe and effective.
So thank you for that. I would reiterate what Dr. Verma said. When we are thinking about providing medication abortion via telemedicine, we have screening questions. And if there are any red flags, if someone does not have a regular menstrual cycle, if somebody is concerned about bleeding or cramping, then they are not eligible for a medication abortion via telemedicine. Of course, our utmost priority in every single patient encounter is patient safety.
Thank you. Ms. Lopez, thank you so much for being here. As you all know, Louisiana recently enacted a law that adds mifepristone and mifepristol, which is another drug used to manage abortion, to the state's controlled substances list. This law would criminalize anyone who possesses the drug without a valid prescription, and it puts it on a category that is in the same category as opioids. I'm just wondering, is there any reason, I mean, what would be the, what do you make of that? And do you believe that medication abortion should be put in the same classification as these other dangerous controlled substances?
The easy answer is no, and I think my colleagues have really reiterated how safe and effective medication abortion is. We have 2 decades of widespread use, of study of this drug, so we know that it is safe and effective both here and globally. It has also become an incredibly important option for folks to access abortion care. 2/3 of abortions are now via medication abortion, and so any effort to restrict it further is simply an effort to make abortion more difficult to obtain.
And what impact does that have on women, for example, living in rural communities, people who have a really, who struggle already to get access to care, including women who, are marginalized in so many other ways and don't get access to care?
Yeah, the folks who are most impacted by all of these abortion restrictions are folks who are already marginalized by our healthcare system. So folks of color, the or underinsured, young folks, LGBTQ folks, and folks who, as you said, Senator, live in rural communities. And so it makes it harder to get. We know now that 1 in 5 abortion seekers is traveling out of state to get care. So it means they're leaving their home communities at significant financial, logistical, and emotional cost to themselves and their families.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Murray.
Well,
Chair Sanders and Rank.
Senator Baldwin is settling in. I just want to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record 7 statements in support of abortion access and reproductive freedom. Without objection. Senator Baldwin.
Thank you. I want to thank you, Senator Murray and Chairman Sanders, for holding this hearing. Because in the wake of the overturning of Roe, I think we must keep drawing attention to the dire consequences on women's health across this country, and particularly in my home state, states like Wisconsin. Before the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, generations of women in this country had only known a country with the right to abortion care, and they only knew a country where every woman had the freedom to make their own choices about if and when to start a family. But when those freedoms were stripped away, Wisconsinites were sent back to the year 1849, the era. They live under a pre-Civil War criminal ban on abortion care. And I've heard such horrifying stories since that ban went into effect about women bleeding out, about contracting life-threatening infections before receiving care, about women forced to travel hours and hours away from their families and support systems to receive care for an unviable pregnancy. Thankfully, more recently, Wisconsin has been able to take important steps to restore abortion services in 3 communities. 3 counties. We have 72 counties. However, without access to care statewide, too many Wisconsinites must still drive hours, take time off work, arrange for childcare, and face medically unnecessary barriers before getting the health care they need. And while some people debate whether it should be the state or the federal government who should decide abortion rights, I believe it's women who should decide about these issues. And that's why we must pass the Women's Health Protection Act, which I author, ensuring that women have the right to make healthcare decisions and freedom to access abortion care no matter where they live. Dr. Linton, I'm so glad that you are here today to share your experience about providing care in Wisconsin. Your testimony highlights the impossible landscape that you and other providers have been forced to navigate in the wake of the Dobbs decision and the effects on real patients in the state of Wisconsin. These stories aren't hypotheticals. They're about real people. And I wanted you to tell us a little bit more about how patients in Wisconsin were affected immediately after Dobbs. How was the Dobbs decision and Wisconsin's archaic 1849 law, how has that harmed Wisconsinites? And I imagine there were people who had appointments for care on the day that the Dobbs decision came out.
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator Baldwin. So, yeah, you're exactly right. Because of the 1849 law, this was not a law that if Dobbs was passed, then we had 30 days or 90 days or whatever. It was, of course, as we've mentioned a couple times, there have been questions about the enforceability, but because of the risks of $10,000 fines and 6 years in prison, that went into effect for us immediately. So at 9:10 a.m. on the 24th of June, we ceased providing care that moment. We had patients in our clinic. We had patients scheduled the next day, and staff members had to go out into the lobby and tell them, because of something that just happened states away, you cannot receive care here today. And it was incredibly difficult for patients and staff to try to figure out next steps to help them get health care.
Thank you. I've introduced legislation that I just described, the Women's Health Protection Act. This bill would guarantee that doctors have the freedom to provide abortion care and give patients the ability to receive the care they need nationwide. How would passage of that act impact in Wisconsin and improve care for patients right now?
Thank you. And as a Wisconsinite, I do want to thank you very much for your leadership on this issue. As I mentioned, and as you mentioned, we've resumed abortion care in Wisconsin, but the future of abortion access in Wisconsin is anything but clear. Even as we are providing abortion care right now, we are still practicing under medically unnecessary restrictions, including 24-hour waiting periods, ban on telemedicine, parental consent law, mandatory ultrasounds, et cetera. So as a physician who sees the impact of these restrictions every single day, I can tell you that federal protections for abortion access will only improve the care that we can provide our patients in Wisconsin.
Thank you. And what do you want us to know about the current state of, tell us how these barriers that you just described that are in part of state law, how do they affect patients that you see?
I think first and foremost, they delay care. We know, as you mentioned, abortion is only accessible in Wisconsin right now in 3 counties. Our state is a lot bigger than 3 counties, so patients are already having to travel long distances. We know that 24-hour bans are often not 24 hours. We have a same physician law in the state of Wisconsin, so the patient has to see the same physician for a counseling appointment is to receive their medication abortion. So oftentimes between those two appointments, it can be a week or plus before they can come back. And abortion is an incredibly time-sensitive procedure. So all of these additional restrictions are creating hoops and barriers for patients to receive routine, or what should be routine health care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Kane.
Thank you. Well, like many who spoke today, I think the Dobbs decision was a disaster, both in terms of the human consequences of it, but also the radical nature of undoing not just 50 years of Roe versus Wade, but 100 years of 14th Amendment precedent that began with cases like whether parents should be able to make their own choices about whether their kids go to parochial schools or not. Should parents be able to make their own choices about educating their children to speak German? Should people be able to marry who they want? And the Supreme Court's decision to cast out not just Roe, but then jeopardize all of these other rights that we've taken for granted for a century has had just a set of horrible consequences. I think we need a national protection. I have a bipartisan bill that would protect both Griswold and Roe and restore to where we are pre-Dobbs and make plain that your rights shouldn't depend on what zip code you live in. Your rights shouldn't depend on who your state legislature is. The notion in Dobbs that the Supreme Court said, but don't worry, you can go to your state legislature, when most of the state legislatures in the country, I mean, look at Congress, it's 26% women. That's cold comfort to say women's rights. Well, you can just count on the legislature to do it right when women are so underrepresented in most of our legislatures. And that's why we have a Constitution. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights is designed to protect core freedoms. Even if the majority is against you, there's something that you should get living in this country, even if you're just one person, that the majority can't trample upon. Virginia, thank goodness, is one of the few states that essentially still follow Roe. There was the basic framework established by Roe, minimal regulation of abortion pre-viability, some more significant regulation post-viability. That's where Virginia is. Not everybody likes that. For some, it's not enough. For some, it's too much. But Virginia has basically done that, and that has put Virginia in an unusual position because we're the last state in the South. The last state in the South that really still provides women and all the rights that Roe guaranteed to them for half a century. Ms. Lopez, you alluded to this in your testimony, but there's an unusual burden in these instances where states like Virginia are protecting reproductive freedom, but surrounded by others that aren't. There was a story in the Washington Post recently, and I mean, here's an example. A woman drove from Houston, Texas to Fort Lauderdale, an 18-hour drive to access reproductive care. She hadn't heard that the Florida 6-week ban had gone into effect. So with no other option and 9 weeks pregnant, she then drove an additional 12 hours to Virginia to receive care. And after she legally was able to terminate her pregnancy at 9 weeks, she then had a 17-hour drive home back to Texas. It's just, I think, outrageous that we're making people do that. But talk a little bit about the burden with this patchwork of, some states protecting women's reproductive freedom and many states not.
Yeah, thank you, Senator, for the question. And as I stated in my testimony, now 1 in 5 abortion seekers are traveling outside of their state to places like Virginia to seek care.
And you said it was 160,000.
Yeah.
80,000 before Dobbs, 160,000 since.
Yeah, and so, and what we know is that, that increases in places like your state for our providers, that increases the number of patients they're getting. So both the residents that they're serving within their own state and now this influx of patients, which means that there's going to be an increased waiting time. So if you think about all of the barriers that someone having to leave their home community, figure out how they're going to pay for the procedure, take off work, find childcare, because most people who seek abortion are also parents themselves, go to an unfamiliar place, probably have to wait, and then also have costs on the ground. The financial, logistical, and ultimately the emotional barriers are ridiculous and sometimes insurmountable, and ultimately could be forcing some people to carry pregnancies to term.
And then finally, this is a hearing that is about how abortion bans have created a healthcare nightmare. That's the title of the hearing, but the Dobbs decision also impacted a whole lot of other rights. Again, this whole 14th Amendment jurisprudence since the mid-19-teens, including the right to contraception. In Virginia, because of the logic of the opinion, Virginia legislators, Sia Price and Ghazala Hashmi, two friends of mine in the Virginia General Assembly, introduced a contraception protection in Virginia law that was passed overwhelmingly by the legislature, but our governor vetoed it. Are you seeing other states, taking the green light of Dobbs to put into question contraception, in vitro, other important healthcare services?
Absolutely, Senator. Not just contraception, but efforts to defund Planned Parenthood continue, to limit or defund Title X, access to contraception for everyone, other restrictions on minors' access to care, IVF, and then we're also seeing, kind of similar efforts around transgender and gender-affirming care. Those are all interrelated and all efforts to limit access to basic reproductive health care.
Well, just as I conclude to my colleagues, Elizabeth Carr, the first child born via IVF in the United States, was born in Virginia in 1981, and I had her as my guest at the State of the Union. And she said when the Alabama Supreme Court rendered the ruling that then led the Alabama healthcare providers to stop IVF, she said, for the first time in my life, I felt like an endangered species. No one should be made to feel that way. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. That will conclude our hearing for today. I will give you a closing statement. I want to thank everybody who's joined us in this discussion. Senator Cassidy, I'll allow you closing remarks, and I have not yet voted, so keep it short. Go ahead.
Okay. First, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an op-ed written by Kelly Crawford, founder and executive director of Able Speaks, an organization created in memory of her son who was diagnosed with trisomy 18. The organization supports families. I think they would feel just as Senator Kane. They feel as if the children who are born with trisomy 18 are being selectively aborted, and that, of course, makes them feel like their lives are threatened. Dr. Verma, just a quick question. You rightly point out that rarely is this done. Would you agree, therefore, that it would be reasonable to restrict late-term abortions?
So first, late-term abortion is not a medical term. We tend to say abortion later in pregnancy.
Would you find it reasonable that after some week that it would be reasonable to restrict an abortion after a certain period of week, given that, if this is the life of the mother and such like that? Because I think that's really the crux. Is there any kind of limit that will be placed? If you say this hardly ever happens or never happens, I think was your words, would it be reasonable then to restrict when this would occur?
When I provide abortion care later in pregnancy, I want you to envision a patient who has a nursery designed, a name picked out,
and I'm just saying,
who is diagnosed with a terrible fetal anomaly
but
or a worsening health condition.
This is not a theoretical. I'm just saying, if the child is otherwise well and the mother's health is well, since you say this hardly ever happens, is it reasonable to have
I will say abortion at the moment of birth does not happen. I also take care of patients who need abortion care later in pregnancy for many different reasons.
And I respected, by the way, I really did respect you speaking of that tension between the week 23 that you would abort and the week 23 that you would resuscitate. I think you're avoiding, I don't mean to be confrontative, but you're avoiding the dialogue here.
No, I totally hear you, and I'm not trying to be confrontational. I'm just trying to highlight what these situations actually look like. So, for example, I did an abortion care later in pregnancy for someone.
I'm not going to get an answer to that, but and Dr. Francis, will you just finish up on that question, please?
Absolutely. Well, I think certainly beyond the point where a child can survive outside of his or her mother, there would never be a reason you would need to intentionally end that child's life. You'd simply deliver that baby, you'd take care of mom, and you'd take care of baby in an appropriate way. And I think that that's something that I would hope that all of us at this table could agree upon.
With that, I yield. Thank you.
Okay.
Let me just give Dr. Verma, I don't think that Senator Cassidy gave you the opportunity to respond effectively. Take 2 minutes to respond and say what you wanted to say.
I appreciate it. I was just trying to paint a picture as a doctor who's actually sitting with these patients and providing this full spectrum of care, what this care actually looks like. So when I'm providing care for a patient, for example, that comes in later in pregnancy, a lot of times it's a patient who's received a terrible fetal diagnosis and is having to make that difficult decision. They have a nursery set up, they have a name picked out, and what they need from me as their doctor is support. I have some patients that choose to continue that pregnancy and deliver at term, and other patients who say that's too traumatic, I can't do that. And my job is to support them in both of those situations with whatever is right in their life. I think as doctors, we all recognize that providing life-saving care sometimes means ending a pregnancy, and to call that care something besides an abortion is an issue of semantics to further a political agenda. And so the care that we're referring to that sometimes means ending a pregnancy, that is abortion care, and that is what we are talking about here, and is sometimes necessary life-saving care for our patients who come in needing this care for a variety of reasons.
Thank you for that comment. And I'll just say that, as Dr. Verma said, abortion up until the moment of birth doesn't happen. Abortions that are later in pregnancy are extraordinarily rare, and they occur essentially only when a pregnancy is non-viable and the mother risks severe injury or death by remaining pregnant. The Democratic position on abortion is simple and mainstream. We want to ensure that every woman has the right to receive abortion care should she need it. The decision to have an abortion is extremely personal, and that should be made in every instant by the patient and their doctor, not by politicians. That is our position. And with that, I just want to end this hearing by saying that this is the truth. This is a topic that is absolutely not going to go away, because women are going to continue suffering under Republicans' extreme abortion bans. They're going to continue to have to travel thousands of miles and scrape together thousands of dollars to get the care when they need an abortion. Pregnant women are experiencing health emergencies and will continue being turned away from hospitals because politicians have made doctors wait until women get sicker and sicker before they're allowed to treat them. More and more women will continue being forced to stay pregnant, forced into motherhood against their will. This is not something you forget. It's not a reality that you ignore. It's not a status quo you get used to. And make no mistake, women are standing up, they are speaking out, and they're fighting back to defend their rights that have been ripped away. Democrats are going to continue to stand with women, lift their voices up like today, and push with everything we've got to restore every woman's right to access abortion care in this country. With that, for any senators who wish to ask additional questions, questions for the record will be due in 10 business days, June 18th by 5 p.m. Committee stands adjourned. Thank you.